as I mentioned before, but also I'm proud to work at the Garden City Co-op. I'm proud to work for this group of men that looks out for your best interest and is very supportive in the direction that management is trying to go, and our best mentors and advisors. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move this over a little bit. I need to be able to move around. You know, I like to think that everything at the Garden City Co-op executes perfectly until I got here and saw some of the gifts being given away today. And one concern I have, Caroline, is in the future, if we're going to be giving away sharp instruments, let's wait till after the question and answer period. That'd be an important one. And I think some of the other gifts deserve explanation. We obviously are planning for a very tough winter, snow belly deep to a tall giraffe, so you've been given blankets, and also we hope you take this to heart, and that is a cup that says Garden City Co-op on this side and the boss on that side. And we hope every morning as you're having your hot chocolate or coffee, you'll remember that you are the boss here, that you own this place, and that was the intent that we had when we ordered these to be given to you. We gave them to the board of directors last month to show what we were giving out, and the first comment they made is, "Why'd you get my wife a mug?" So you take the boss however you want to. There's a lot of sayings about the high plains of Kansas, and they certainly all come back to mind during the dry period. And so this is one of the things that was said to Mark Twain about the high plains of Kansas. All this country needs is water and a few good people. To which Mark Twain answered, "That's all hell needs too." So we're going to talk a little bit about drought, but before we do, I want to talk about some things that are going on at your co-op, and that is, but before we do, I guess the first thing is the things that are the same at the co-op. Last year, I warned you about regulations that we were facing and regulations that would eventually affect you on your farms, and that pace is certainly accelerated. I just heard this morning on the radio that the Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the cost of the last 4 years worth of regulation on the United States, just the cost to administer that, will be $5 billion a day. And I think we can all agree that's unlikely to slow down. So the thing that we've learned since the annual meeting last year is not only do we need to prepare to deal with regulations on top of regulations, but that most of the regulatory agencies that are providing oversight to us are using fines and fees as a way to generate income to insulate themselves from the legislative process. So in the last year, we've had DOT, we've had federal motor carriers, we've had OSHA, we've had a variety of other regulators stop us on the roads, and by and large, we've made it through without any fines or fees. But that is not something we can count on. And just a side note, without getting too political, in the past, you as farmers have had kind of the endorsement of legislators that you wouldn't be held to some of the same standards that industry was. And that's probably still the case. The problem is, if you don't sell the majority of your farm products at a farmer's market on Saturday morning, you're not a farmer to those people. You're part of Food Inc. And so, without just the drought, I thought I'd pile on a little bit about what we have to look forward to in this regulatory environment. In spite of that, we have some exciting things that are going to happen over the next year. The first thing is, we have been inundated by people asking us to start up the patron note program. That has been a successful program. It tends to cut our interest costs, but more importantly, provide you a better return than you can find out in the marketplace, and it gives you a chance to reinvest in your local co-op. And so this is not a solicitation, but you will be getting letters that will explain the program, and we're excited that we will be reopening the Patron Note program with an initial offering of about $4 million. We're excited this year in light of the drought and all the other challenges that we'll be distributing $1.25 million in cash. And Boyd went through a lot of the other numbers. We have been able to be very profitable and very successful and very successful in maintaining our liquidity so that we had the cash to keep operating. In the past few years, we've been retiring 2 years for every year in old equity. And this year, with concerns about the drought and lower volumes, and also the aggressive stance that we're taking in building new facilities, we have decided at this time to not issue an equity retirement for this year. But it is our desire, and certainly a board priority, that that equity retirement begin as quickly as it can again. So I had a guy tell me, if I was going to be a gambler, I would probably prefer roulette to farming, because the odds against me there are only 32 to 1. So, I don't know if any of you saw it, there's a new book out called The Worst Hard Time that talks about the Dust Bowl and the drought. And you can see what's coming next. I'm going to talk about what's happened to our volumes. But The Worst Hard Time book is a great read if you haven't seen it, and it was the book that they did the PBS special that just came on here a couple of weeks ago about the Dust Bowl. And one of the quotes in there is that the Great Plains would not sustain a civilization based on agriculture. And it certainly struggled during the 30s and the 50s, and it's because of your farming practices now that we're doing better. But it is a challenging time. So if we look at grain volume, and what I've done here is not compared against an average year. The first column is 2009, the best year we ever had in terms of grain volume. The second column, the middle column, is 11, and then this is this last year, 2012. The blue is wheat, the red is corn, and the green is milo. And so it's pretty easy, and this isn't a surprise to you. This has certainly been the case on all of your farms as well. But particularly for the dryland crops, we have really struggled, but surprisingly, even corn is down significantly. So if we add all those up, we were above 30 million bushels in 09, and you can see we're less than half that for the last 2 years. And that's one reason it doesn't seem like the lines in your elevators are quite as long as they were. Same things happened in fertilizer. The blue is dry fertilizer, the red is anhydrous, and the green is liquid. And that's also 2009 versus 11 and 12. And so you can see just the same pattern. If you don't have moisture, it's hard to get excited about fertilizing. And when you combine that, it's also cut our volumes about in half. Well, enough about this drought talk. The fact of the matter is we all knew that this was cyclical in its nature, and good years follow bad years, and they always have, and we're anticipating the rain. We're certainly anticipating big snowfall this winter. And so we have aggressively continued to build facilities. There's a couple, 3 recent elevator expansions there. And in addition to that, Boyd showed additions to crop production for speed and accuracy, new scale houses, and in addition to new facilities, we continue to plan for the future for double scales, for all those kind of things as we can afford to do them. So when we look at this as a board and management team, we're very excited to see the recent growth, and widely based across our whole geographic area. Unfortunately, when you guys in harvest line, I'm sure it seems like this. And so we've continued to keep that a priority, to build faster and more speed. And our entire focus was on how to add on to existing facilities that we have. And then in the middle of wheat harvest this last summer, we had Wolf. And that's a picture of our blowout at Wolf, and the engineers tell you that a bin is relatively stable while it sits still, and you're only in risk of this kind of blowout if you're loading or more likely unloading the bin. That bin had sat for 3 days by itself, nobody touched it, and nobody started to move grain out, and it just fell out. The only happy part of this story is that nobody was injured. This is the same thing that happened in Russell, Kansas a couple, 3 years ago that cost the lives of 2 young men there. In addition, recently, Copeland had a blowout, and then in this last week, you've probably seen pictures, but Oakley had a huge blowout. They dumped out 2 bins in an interstice right on the mainline UP Railroad. So our thoughts go out to those people, but fortunately, again, outside of the Russell incident, nobody's been injured in this. But what this forced us to do was to take some of our focus off just adding to, just speeding up. Now all of a sudden we came to the realization that some of our elevators, and this isn't just Garden City Co-op, across the whole Midwest, elevators were built 50 and 60 years ago with the 40 and 50 year life. And so this is probably not the last of these pictures that you will see. So let's review a little bit about what our facilities look like. First, I guess, let's talk about the effect that Wolf had. Now, if you look at all of our concrete storage, which is the red line, and then you look at the amount of bins that we know that we have issues with, it's a very small percentage. And so it would be easy to look at that chart and say, well, it's not that big a problem. We got a lot of storage and most of it seems to be working well. We haven't identified a problem with it yet. But the real challenge becomes, like at Wolf, not only the bin that split out had a problem, but as we did a more intensive investigation, there were problems with every bin in that annex. And it took the whole 260,000 bushel out of production. We had to empty that out, and we couldn't put anything in for fall harvest. And not only did it take 260,000 bushel out of that neighborhood, but it took out the dryer, because these were the bins that served the dryer. And so while that graph doesn't show much of a big problem that we know about yet, the fact of the matter is it's a great big problem if that's your neighborhood elevator that you're planning on delivering, and that 10 circles of corn, one of them was yours, and by the way, you needed the dryer. So it isn't as easy as just looking at those kind of challenges across the company. So if you want to see where all of our elevators, when they were built, there it is. The first ones were built back in the 30s, and this includes all of the elevators from Dighton and Sullivan. This is all of the elevators that we're currently operating. Certainly more concrete, this is just concrete construction. Certainly more concrete was built in the 40s and a bunch in the 50s. And then we kind of tapered off, and since then we've been trying to add a little bit as we go along. Now in the 2000s, you can see we didn't build any new facilities, but we were certainly merging with companies. That's when Dighton came in, that's when Sullivan Grain came in, and so we were pretty busy during that decade, just no new construction. But at Wolf, Deerfield, and Shields, we've restarted that again. So if you want to review where we're at and what type of storage we have, by and large, we're a concrete storage company. We have a little over 19 million bushels of concrete storage, about 3 million bushels of flat storage at 3 locations, and then a couple of steel bins that adds up to about 1 million bushels. Now here's the critical slide when it comes to considering blowouts. In the 1970s, there was a board of engineers that began to draw up specifications and provide oversight for concrete construction. Before that, it was based completely on the knowledge and the oversight that was happening. And so your only real method of being assured that it was a good facility was if you contracted with a reliable company and they had a reliable guy on the job site and they did a good job of monitoring those operations, a lot of times 24 hours. And that's really what caught us at Wolf. Because what happened at Wolf was they built those bins by the specifications that were in place back in the 50s, and that was, as they poured up, they just threw rebar in. And as long as it stayed in place and did what it was supposed to do, you didn't have a lot of problems. But sometimes that rebar would float, and sometimes your seams weren't as you would hope, and so just like what happened at Wolf, they zippered open unexpectedly. Now today, for all of the bins built after 1980, there's a whole new set of specifications that requires people to put the rebar in place, tie it in place, make sure that it stays there. And so we have a great deal of confidence in anything that we've built since the 80s. Unfortunately, most of our facilities, Deerfield being the only ground up since the 70s, most of our facilities were built before this. And so we're trying to do as good a job as we can with our insurance company, with Ag Services, with KFSA. We learned things through the Wolf deal, and we're continuing to go through bin by bin and not just review what's going on the outside of the bin, but drop lights down and try and assess what the importance really is. So it's a big challenge. And the whole point of this presentation is while we're excited to continue on in our march towards building for speed and capacity and making sure that we can provide the service that you want, it's coming to the point in a lot of our facilities' lifespan where we're going to have to begin to review, as you do older farm equipment, when do you quit repairing and start calling it restoring? You know, when do you tear it down and build some new? Repairing a bin is a big challenge. They're going to repair the 2 dryer bins and the bin that had the blowout at Wolf. And for those 3 bins, it will take 4 months. It'll take about as long to fix those 4 bins as it does to build a new facility south of town. In addition, it costs exactly the same to repair a bin as to build a new for the concrete. The problem comes in is you've got a lot of dollars tied up in equipment and dryers and those kind of things, and when you begin to move those, then it gets very, very expensive. So we've got a big challenge moving ahead about not only being mindful of more speed, more capacity, better service, but also as elevators begin to be challenged in their integrity, we have the question of, do we build at a new location? If you could move that elevator, would you? Or do you repair the old, or do you go forward? Well, this is the real challenge. You know, we've got a lot of challenges. We've had some successful years, and we continue to generate a lot of cash and be able to reinvest at a rapid rate in our business. But the real challenge for those of us in this room is to make sure that the Garden City Co-op is not only sound for today, but for moving forward. And so in addition to building facilities and adding scales and all of the things we do, we continue to invest very heavily in our people. In continuing education, we've got 3 people that are working on master's degrees right now. We've got continual training on both safety and operations. And so we're excited we invest in our people, but we also invest in you. We invest heavily in the 4-H and the FFA program. We were really gratified this year that Otis and Mary Lee Moles came to us and asked if we would play a role in picking the student that fills their scholarship at K-State. And we take that as a very high honor and take that very seriously, and we appreciate your support of K-State and previous students, Otis, and want to assure you that we'll continue on focused on K-State, on 4-H, on FFA, and all the things that we try to invest to make sure that when this guy comes along, he's got the elevators and the services and he has a chance as well. Thank you very much.